Hello everyone, we're going to make a start on this first panel of the afternoon, which is called From Collection to Display, Putting Popular Music on Show. We've got 3 speakers. We're going to do paper, 5 minutes of questions, paper, 5 minutes of questions, which means we're going to overrun slightly, but I'm sure you'll bear with us. So the first speaker is Dr. MARION Leonard of the Institute of Popular Music at the University of Liverpool, with a paper called There's No Place Like Home, Exhibiting Local Music Histories Within the Museum.
Thank you, Rob. Hi, I should probably preface this by just explaining that 2 of the papers that we're going to present, myself and Rob, both come out of a project that we've had running, which is AHSC funded, which is looking at how popular music is put on display, how it's collected across museums within the UK. And then that will be followed by Andy's paper, who's also been an advisor on the project. Okay, so I'm beginning to, with just thinking about the Home of Metal exhibition, which describes itself as celebrating the bands that put Birmingham and Black Country on the musical map. Throughout, the exhibition engages with different aspects relating to locality. It charts the areas that band members have grown up in, the venues in which they played, and discusses local scenes in which they participated. It also explores the soundscapes and landscape of Birmingham, the Black Country, and how it might be heard and seen within the textures and imagery of the bands that emerged from the region. Now, Home of Metal is the latest example of a number of temporary popular music exhibitions shown in the UK over the past few years, which draw connections between music, social history and place. And these exhibitions have taken place in cities including Newcastle, Salford, Cardiff, Coventry, Reading, Rochdale, Liverpool and Manchester. Each of these exhibitions have presented visitors with a situated history of popular music, exploring the artists, bands and sounds that have emerged from a specific locale. Aside from dedicated exhibitions such as these, popular music is also increasingly featured within permanent social history displays which tell city stories. Drawing on interviews from music curators across the UK, conducted by Rob and myself as part of our project, I want to make some initial observations about the ways in which the relationship between music and place has been explored in these recent exhibitions and how they've represented local histories. Music histories, of course, are more commonly relayed through media other than exhibition. Indeed, film documentaries, autobiographies, biographies, print journalism and television programmes tend to provide the dominant means through which music histories are constructed. Alongside these are academic books and papers which often serve to problematise the prevailing narratives of media histories or seek perhaps to give alternative perspectives through the analysis of less celebrated performers and scenes. Museum engagements with popular music have by comparison been relatively recent, and yet I think it's important to consider what they add through their interpretations. Museums remain key sites of learning about history and are public institutions through which narratives about history are endorsed and disseminated to the public. The featuring of popular music and the ways in which it is presented also lends a sense of legitimacy and institutional recognition to the practices of daily life. On the one hand, their engagements with historical source material, already mentioned, which informs their narrative presentations, but on the other hand, they're also productive in offering new angles or introducing new voices to relay histories. So in this paper, I want to consider how the institution of the museum and the pressures, demands, practices and responsibilities of museum curation shape the way in which these histories are presented. In particular, to consider how the culture, curatorial approaches, management and funding of a museum have an impact upon the exhibitions that are produced and the histories that are represented. Now, to explore this, I want to suggest that the context of production can direct, shape, constrain, but also open up the historical narrative. So I'll begin with the argument that the interpretation of popular music exhibition is directed by the host institution. In simple terms, this can be seen that the stated mission of a museum influences what material is put on show and how it is interpreted. One illustration of this is an exhibition which has come to be one of our project case studies called Pop Peth, which was shown at St Fagans National History Museum on the outskirts of Cardiff. St Fagans is chiefly an open-air museum, with Parkland hosting over 40 original buildings from all over Wales, which have been re-erected on the site as a way to demonstrate how people in Wales have lived, worked and spent their leisure time. Their staging of a temporary popular music exhibition was directed by that overall mission, so that the material culture of popular music was presented as part of a folk heritage, including this reconstructed student bedroom in an echo of the vernacular buildings they have on display around the site. This chimed with the overall remit of the host institution in a particular framing of popular music practice. That is, an exploration of music practices in everyday life, particular localised leisure practices, and patterns of consumption related to identity. It presented how Welsh bands and engagements with music in Wales represented a modern articulation of Welsh culture which struck a chord with young people who lived locally. A different but related example can be taken of the programming of exhibitions at Urbis in Manchester, which until its closure last year was an exhibition centre focused on city life. The decision to finance popular music exhibitions as part of its programming can be seen as a recognition of the instrumental role that city environments have had in enabling creative practice, allowing scenes to emerge and providing the infrastructure for those scenes to take a sustained and material form. The music genres, cities and ventures Urbis focused on are particularly clear examples of the connections between music and the urban environment. An exhibition on the music and culture of Detroit, a city that was once a model of modern industrialism and has become a symbol of urban decline. Two genre-focused exhibitions, one shown here on hip-hop, the other on punk, where clear lines can be drawn between creative expression, style, sound, message and the urban environment. And also a show about the Hacienda, a club which has become symbolic of Manchester's status as a post-industrial city. So in these examples then, you can see how the way in which place and music is explored map onto the agendas and the mission statements of museums. In other cases, the interpretive line taken within exhibitions can be seen to be informed by the specificities of the location of the museum itself and the nuances of its cultural geography and social context. These particular circumstances can steer not only what subjects are selected for display, but how they are explored, so that the treatment of music and place is mobilised by and for the museum in particular ways. And I'll take the example here of an exhibition which is just in the planning stages for Ulster Museum, called Alternative Ulster. And it's focusing on the social lives and street styles of people living in Northern Ireland between 1966 and 2000. In this instance, we can see how the history of place offers a new perspective on the ways in which music is narrativized. The context of conflict immediately demands that leisure is taken seriously, while in turn, the subject of music and leisure offers a new entry point into a conversation about locality, enabling an exploration of a well-known context from a new angle. The exhibition was motivated by feedback from local people that the Troubles Gallery in the museum tended to focus on big news events, and that they wanted to have more of their daily lives represented. As the exhibition curator commented, in reality, most people, for most of the time, continued to live their lives and to be the person they wanted to be and not have their lives dictated by the conflict. The context of the Troubles demands that the exhibition takes a certain trajectory, not just as a celebration of canonic artists that have come from Northern Ireland, but rather as a reflection of how people have experienced social lives and engaged in the pursuit of pleasure and escape. It can still be considered to be a celebration, but one which throws the focus onto everyday experience. As another curator there commented, one of the central messages of the exhibition is that life went on, and also that the Troubles did, in spite of that, have a very strong influence on cultural and social life of the time. So in this example, the focus on music allows a way to explore ordinary life in a way which has seldom been the focus of media interest. The exhibition is still in development, but I think we can say that the final display will be able to be read on two levels, both of which tie into the geography and role of Ulster Museum. Firstly, it will be a social history, a narrative produced by the museum for visitors about local experience, charting how social lives were managed day to day in the context of the Troubles. Secondly, it will be an exhibition which is informed by current curatorial practice and also heavily influenced by the current social and political context in which it is produced. Curatorial decisions will need to be made about balance, about how political lyrics are dealt with, and about what gets left out. As one of the curators commented, we're interested in exploring themes like conflict, but also in some ways how you move out of conflict, because that is what has happened here. It's a work in progress. The exhibition then, produced in the context of post-ceasefire Northern Ireland, can also be understood as part of that process. So an important relationship can be drawn between subject, content and interpretation of music exhibitions and the museums that display them. However, in saying that, I don't want to present exhibitions as if they're just produced by this one singular entity. Indeed, the relationship between the different people active in the production of an exhibition may not be naturally symbiotic, as tensions can arise which reveal differences in how different actors understand the rationale for and the role of the exhibition. These tensions might be between designers, curators, marketing officers, project managers, even funders, as each has a stake within how that concept gets realised. And that moves me on to my point about how the context of production can potentially constrain the historical narrative. To illustrate, I want to take the example of the North East Beat exhibition, which explored the North East popular music scene from the 1940s to the present day. The project focused on music within a region and was a touring exhibition which was shown in Newcastle, South Shields and Sunderland. When I asked the curator about the criteria she used for inclusion in the exhibition, she explained that in putting together the project, she'd been interested in the idea of local distinctiveness and whether a soundscape could be matched to the region. She explained that she wished to open up the question, is there a North East beat? And is there anything which makes it different? She went on to comment that in the process of research, a lot of the musicians, especially the contemporary ones, just said that being from the North East didn't necessarily have an impact on the music they were making or make it different to anywhere else. It's quite a complex thing, I guess, to get across in an exhibition. So the musicians that she canvassed argued against the notion of local exceptionalism and refuted the idea that their creative practice was influenced by their geographic location. This immediately suggested a more complex picture of how the relationship between creativity, locality, tradition and sound might be understood. Of course, the dismissal of the local by these musicians might also have been a strategy to position themselves within a wider frame of reference, or to escape being pigeonholed as a local act. But while the comments cannot necessarily be taken at face value, nor understood as definitive, they do provoke a debate. She went on to comment, "So my original answer was going to be incorporating all of that, but then it went through different members of staff and we decided to go with something quite positive about the variety of bands that were coming out of the North East." So whilst the curator wanted to reflect the views of the musicians, hence complicating simple connections between popular music and place, other staff members wished to avoid a narrative which might seem rather equivocal. It might be that the management team wished to avoid confusing the audience and so favoured a clearer message. But I think that the comment that the decision to go with something quite positive is rather telling. It suggests that a message which does not put emphasis on the importance of place as a stimulus for creative production would be in some ways negative. Here then the potential scope of the exhibition is constrained as the topic has moved away from a question about whether there's a discernible local sound and towards a more celebratory message of local musical productivity. It was not that the other messages were lost entirely, but that they were not prioritised in the display and so may not have had the same communicative impact. Now the resulting exhibition was in fact very engaging, but what I want to do here is just to highlight how the message can be given a rather particular steer as its remit comes to be refined in the process of production. Finally, I want to turn to another example, which can also be seen as a celebration of the local, but in this instance is focused on just one musician living locally, rather than being a broader review concerned with the musical output of a city or region. The example here is Scarworth Laurel exhibition, which was produced by the Newark Museum and Art Gallery in Leicester last year. It's an example of how an exhibition can introduce new voices into the historical narrative and offer fresh perspectives on musical histories of a city, helping to fill gaps. The exhibition focused on the life and work of Laurel Aitken, an influential musician who moved to England from Jamaica, settling in Leicester. He came to be referred to as the godfather of ska. In putting together the exhibition, the curator came across what could be seen as a pretty major stumbling block. She explained, "There isn't anything written about Laurel. He's not the sort of person you can flick through black history or reggae history books or ska history books and find a lot about him. The occasional sentence is there, but people don't realise the contribution he made because more Jamaican artists came over after him to the UK and made a more lasting contribution. But in terms of the trailblazer, who made it possible for people like Bob Marley to come over, Laurel Aitken was the man. So we had to find a way to deal with that." The solution was to make direct contact with Laurel's wife and the numerous musicians who he'd worked with across his career, and to undertake oral history with these contacts. The exhibition then downplayed the curatorial voice and used quotes from the numerous oral histories in order to narrate his life story. It was thus able to make a disadvantage into an advantage. From the starting point of a lack of information, the curator undertook oral histories to tell a little-known story centred on a local resident, which also connected with a history of migration and discussions around globalisation, exploring how musical influences have been imported, reworked and enculturated. As the curator commented, "If you tell Laurel's biographical story, you tell the story of Jamaican music coming to the UK and becoming popular in the UK in the various waves and revivals that have taken place." Part of the curator's approach was also, I think, driven by pragmatism. She had a tiny budget for the exhibition, which just paid for the production of the display panels. As a salaried member of staff, she used her time to undertake the oral histories and relied on loans from the contacts that she made for the exhibition material. Oral histories were a solution to the lack of available information, but also brought other advantages. They could be used as a piece of audio so that the exhibition was not that reliant on text. They were expressed in informal speech, which tends to hold the attention of visitors, and they were a way to include different perspectives, thus helping to offer more histories of lived experience, reflecting the voices of the museum public. So in conclusion then, I want to argue that the processes of curating an exhibition is subject to a particular set of pressures which inform the resulting production. These include a range of factors such as institutional agendas, availability of material, copyright legislation, budget, and research time. The production of local music histories also carries some responsibility, particularly the need not to uncritically replicate mythologies linked to place, to avoid tying music into the local so tightly that it misrepresents the way in which sounds travel and influences hail from a variety of directions, and to resist endorsing existing canons and modes of representation without holding them up to scrutiny. The medium of exhibition imposes certain demands, many of which can very productively contribute to the available knowledge about this subject. I've focused here on museums engaged with social history, which place value on histories of ordinary people and the experience of everyday life. As a result, these exhibitions are active in telling hidden histories and in bringing to public attention material which normally is outside museum walls and often absent from written histories. Now, that's not to say that they don't also cover more familiar ground, because to successfully market and gain good visitor figures for an exhibition often demands engagement with the star system and the display of rare items. But nonetheless, the process of exhibiting objects, images and sounds can produce an experience of music from home, which I think can be at once comforting, nostalgic, and also refreshingly unfamiliar. Thank you.
Just before I ask for questions, I've been asked to point out that the evaluation sheets, to ask you to fill in the evaluation sheets which you were given on the way in and hand them back on the way out of this session. So, does anybody have any questions for Marion? If we can keep it to questions rather than comments, because we've only got 5 minutes really. Paul?